Well, thank you everyone out there for joining us for this evening's event. My name is Nick. I'm one of the events hosts here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our upcoming events on powells.com. And if you don't already do so, please follow us on our social media channels via Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. But tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Shea Ernshaw and Amanda Montell. Hey. Shea Ernshaw is a New York Times bestselling author, winner of the Oregon Book Award, and her novels Wicked Deep and Winterwood were indie next picks. But tonight she'll be talking about A History of Wild Places, an atmospheric novel following three residents of a secluded, seemingly peaceful commune as they investigate the disappearances of two outsiders. Hauntingly beautiful, hypnotic, and bewitching, this is a story about fairy tales, our fear of the dark, and losing yourself within the wilderness of your mind. Ernshaw will be joined in conversation by Amanda Montell, language scholar and author of Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism, and the critically acclaimed Wordslut, a feminist guide to taking back the English language. This event will include an audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen if you'd like to ask a question, as well as if someone has typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Lastly, support Shea and Powell's by purchasing a copy of her book from us. A link to buy History of Wild Places along with Amanda's books will be shared in the chat a couple of times tonight. All right, so Shea and Amanda, thank you so much for joining us and for all the conversation. Excellent. Thanks.
I'm super excited to be here and to talk about your beautiful book, which I just finished yesterday and is just delicious. It's not a genre that I hardly ever read, but I loved it so much. And now I want to go down a rabbit hole, and I'll maybe ask you for similar recommendations toward the end of the night, because it really was such a treat to read. I guess just to kick off our conversation, I would just love to know what the impetus was for writing about cults, particularly in this context of a sort of darkly wistful literary thriller, I guess I would call it.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for being here, Amanda. I'm looking forward to our death match later.
I know.
Yeah, so for me, I've always had a deep fascination with cults, and I think it began, I actually grew up not far from a town called Antelope, Oregon, which is where, you're already nodding your head, you know where I'm going with this, which is where the community Rajneeshpuram was established back in the 80s. And there's a documentary on Netflix called Wild Wild Country for those who've seen it or would like to go learn more about this really interesting community. And you probably, Amanda, can kind of jump in, and you probably know some details about the community as well. So living not far from this community, it was in the news a lot. It was something that was talked about, you know, neighbors were talking about the community and sort of the ups and downs and the things that were going on. And I remember one day my dad saw a fleet of Rolls Royces being driven out to the community for the leader of the community, Osho. And I remember being really fascinated by the juxtaposition of that, because here was this community that was really trying to live off the land. They were doing subsistence farming, and yet they, for some reason, needed, I think it was a couple dozen Rolls Royces out in the middle of the desert. And I had a lot of questions around that. You know, what is happening there? And I think that sparked it for me. So I've always had a real fascination with alternative living, communes, cults, you know, what prompts someone to want to live in a community like this? And ultimately, can a community like this exist without corruption seeping in? Can it be sustainable and healthy, and can it last? And so that was the real question for me that I had when I went into writing this book. Not that I got an answer ultimately from writing it, and, you know, without giving anything away of what happens in the book, but that was really the start for me, was asking that question, like, can this community exist and not have corruption?
Yeah.
Did it work?
Isn't it just so funny how there are certain regions of the US where you can't leave your house without running into a cult of some kind. I live in one of those regions, Southern California, and
Yeah.
the Pacific Northwest is also a pretty cult-centric area of the country, isn't it?
Yes. Hotbed for cults.
It really is. I mean, it's like manifest destiny, you know, you come out west to try to seek fame, enlightenment, gold, you know, these unattainable things.
Right.
So I would love to know sort of creating a cult out of your imagination. Sounds like so much fun. It's something different from what I did, obviously, as writing nonfiction. But people do sometimes ask me if I were to create a cult, what would it be like? Just
Yeah.
it's so interesting how people are able to hold the humor and the darkness surrounding cults in their minds at the same time so easily. I think we all are able to do that to some degree. But I'd love to know for you, as you were creating this community, how did you decide on the setting, the details, the rules, the beliefs? You know, how did you narrow it down? What was the inspiration for those things?
Yeah. For me, with all of my books, when I sit down to write something, the first element that I need to develop is the setting. So with all of my books, I first have an idea of where I want the story to take place, and then I begin populating the story with characters and people. And then the story really takes shape and the plot takes shape around that setting. So I knew that I really wanted a story to take place in Northern California. There's actually a small commune that does currently exist in Northern California, which I won't name, but they are living, mostly off the grid, and they've been there for a really long time. And I had seen a really old documentary about this community, and that setting for me really resonated, and I knew that I wanted to create a similar setting for the book. And then when it came time to really create like the rules of the cult and the people within it, which I refer to it more as a community and less of a cult because the people in it don't believe they're in a cult.
Sure.
But
Do they ever?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think for me, those rules really sort of developed as I was writing it. Once I start populating it with my characters and my people, and, the book begins, without giving anything away, it begins with Travis Wren, who's really a washed up psychic who is tracking this missing woman, Maggie St. James, and he tracks her to this community. And so as I'm writing the story, I'm sort of learning about the community as like he first arrives there, and then I'm having to sort of figure out what does this community look like. And then as soon as Travis arrives in the community and he vanishes, now clearly there's some dark things happening in this community. And for me, it was about sort of stitching together the truth about what was really happening here. And that part was a whole other complicated ball of yarn because there were a lot of, mysteries and lies and secrets that were happening. And so finding a way to sort of weave those together was also part of developing the rules of this community, which was really the funnest part, like coming up with those details of like, what are their rituals? What are their celebrations look like? It was established in the 1970s and a lot has changed in the community since the 70s. And so that was interesting too, to see how it's evolved over the years, especially a community that's been cut off. So they're really isolated and cut off from the outside world for a really long time. So there's certain elements that happen in that sense because they don't know what's going on in the outside world.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense that you would sort of develop these rituals and beliefs and rules as you went piecing them together, because that's also genuinely how a cult or commune or community, these things don't have, hard and fast lines separating them. That's also how they come up with their rules. No one like sits down and outlines how every protocol and regulation is going to work for the rest of the cult's life. Normally it just starts out with good intentions and, a mission, and it sort of evolves and becomes more extreme from there. So
they're not creating a business plan for how dark and twisted it's going to get. Like year 1, everything's going to be great. By year 5, we're we're really going to get into some dark stuff. Like, just wait, everybody.
Exactly.
Because no one would stick around, right?
Of course. I mean, I think that gets at some of the mythology and lore surrounding cults, is that, you know, we think these are these nefarious groups that set out to wreak havoc. And of course, why would anyone ever join a group like that?
Right. Which is really what happened with Rajneeshpuram, the community near where I lived. Is it started out with really just some beautiful ideology and some of the best intentions you can imagine. And then, you know, things really go downhill. But I think that's also just reflective or mirrors what happens in the real world, right? Like, is it possible to create a form of government or a system, whether it's large form or small form, without sort of that corruption and that need for power to sneak in?
It is such a fascinating question, and I want to talk more about that with you shortly. I guess first I'd love to know, what were some sort of lesser known facts or concepts about cults that were important for you to represent in the book?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. You know, when I sat down to write it, I didn't do a ton of research into cults specifically. I think for me, it was really about like, what's some of the like darker, more twisted ideas that could happen inside a community like this. And I think too, because I wanted the reader to initially enter the community and feel like this is a nice place. You know, there's some beauty in this community. And so I didn't want to establish maybe certain elements that we've seen before in other cults, so that it would be too obvious. Like, oh, this is bad. I've seen this before in all of these other.
Oh, cults. Everyone's head is shaved, etc.
Right. Like, oh, I know where this is headed. You know, and even with the leader of the community, I wanted you to initially maybe sympathize or see where, like, okay, there's some good intentions here, but stuff starts to veer downhill pretty quickly. So yeah, I didn't base the story on any specific other like cult elements that I had necessarily researched in that sense, I guess.
That makes sense. You came by it more in terms of what would serve the story and what would make these sympathetic characters. That makes sense. I mean, Speaking of that, like, we tend to otherize members of groups like this as sort of pathetic and intellectually deficient and desperate, and there are so many negative attributes that you could name. How did you approach these characters and cultivate a sense of empathy and humanity for them? Because there really is one throughout every single character arc.
Yeah, you know, the otherness element I always find really fascinating, because, you know, whenever a group of people gather together and create an ideology amongst one another, you know, inadvertently, you then are labeling yourselves as part of this group or community, whatever that is. And anyone outside of that is the other. And, you know, we've seen that a lot throughout history. I mean, how many wars are started because it's about the other and those who are part of this community. And not just community, but I mean, as you know, with your podcast, you've really dug into a lot of different things in our culture and our society that behave cultish, if I could just use your term.
Yes.
But in terms of, you know, sympathizing with the characters, I mean, I always want all of my characters to be likable, even the villains, because that's what makes them the most interesting. And I think each of the characters in the book was really wanting something different. So, you know, you have Theo. I have to be so careful when I talk about this book, like I'm catching myself almost giving things away. So, you know, Theo, who really wants out of the community and is taking some dangerous actions to try to see if there is a way out of the community. And then he has his wife, Calla, who is happy and content and doesn't want to leave, but suspects her husband is keeping secrets and there's something going on. And then her sister, B, who is in a relationship with the leader of the community. She's probably one of the more complicated characters, I think. And, you know, she's keeping a lot of secrets and it's hard to tell, you know, at times she wants to leave, at times she wants to stay. And so they each really want something different, and they are all keeping secrets from one another and are also keeping secrets from themselves. So they were really complex characters to write because, you know, at any given point of view, I had to consider in that scene, like, what does this character know about their surroundings? What do they think they know they might be wrong about? What does the reader know about this character, or what do they know that the character doesn't know? I mean, it just was like the biggest brain twist.
I'm sure. I can't conceive of what it must be like to write a novel like this. It really
And
does.
I swore to myself I would not write a multiple POV book after that. Like, I will never do it again. And yet I do have a book on deck that I will be working on later next year that is multiple point of view.
Oh,
so.
I'm sure. It's like giving birth, you know, you're just like, never again. You're like, and you're
Or could I?
Yes. You have like such a beautiful, and the word atmospheric is on the cover of your book, and I think it really is accurate. You have such an ability to create a sense of mood with your language. Where do you think that comes from? Like, how did you develop your particularly distinct voice, or at least the voice that you use in this book? What were sort of the inspirations for the way that you use language in the book?
Look, I was a brooding teenager like everyone else, so I wrote a lot of poetry. And I think, you know, that probably started it for me. But I love setting and I love atmosphere so much. I joke with my Spanish editor all the time that I will someday write a book that has no characters in it, and it will just be a story about like a tree or the forest. And nobody will buy this book. Nobody will read this book. You're
like the Bob Ross of books, you know,
yes.
Just painting happy little trees.
Exactly. Yeah. Like that is my happy place. So I could write a series of novels about nothing except just describing setting. So I get steered back on track by, you know, my editors and agents, and as they should. But yeah, that part comes naturally for me. That part is easy and that part is fun. For me, the difficult part is characters, because humans are really messy and really complicated. And to make humans come across as real and believable is really challenging, you know, and they all have to have their own different emotions. And that's the part that for me is like the slog of writing. But when I get to move out of a dialogue scene and just describe the way the rain is hitting the roof, I'm like, just leave me here for like 50 pages and I am happy.
So interesting. I wonder if it has anything to do with the setting against which you grew up or where you live now. I mean, it's clear that you have such a love of nature and atmosphere, and it must have to do with your childhood, as these things always do.
Yes. Yeah. You know, I don't imagine myself ever writing a book in a cityscape or like an urban landscape. I mean, I won't say never, because I'm going to say that here, and then next year I'll write something and you'll be calling.
That has 65 points of view and it takes place in Tokyo.
Yeah, exactly. And you'll be like, I told you so. I knew this was coming.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, I do find cities really beautiful. I mean, there is something really energetic and magnetic and stunning about a city. But for me, like where the inspiration really strikes me is in the natural world. So yeah, I'm going to stay here for a little bit at least.
It's a good place to be. It's a place where I dream of living in a city. So it's nice to be able to disappear into that in your work. Were there any characters or details or like fun little vignettes that ended up on the cutting room floor? I know you mentioned you had a lot to keep track of in this book. Did you cut any darlings, and can we know what they were?
Yes. You know, when we have to cut our babies, that's the hardest part. This book, surprisingly, no, this book stayed pretty well intact from like the initial draft, which is really unusual. But I think because it was so complicated, I had to create such detailed outlines for this story, which I'm a major outliner anyway, and I create layered in-depth outlines. But for this one, I really had to do that. And so I think because I had to be so specific and so detailed that by the time I had a finished draft, like there wasn't a lot that could be altered really. Because, you know, you take something out and like the whole thing could unravel really.
Totally.
I think the only thing that really changed was early on, my very sweet editor, Lone, who might be here, wanted me to speed up the beginning, because I think when Travis is traveling through the forest and reaching the community, I was in the forest. So I was describing the trees at length. And I think my editor was like, he needs to get there eventually. Like, you can't do this for 3 chapters. So, you know, I had to cut some probably beautiful tree description that no one will ever see.
Very on brand for you. You'll save it for the book that stars trees and only trees.
Yes, exactly. Oh, and I see Lone is here. She says, yes, I'm here.
So you were mentioning before how your ultimate question that you set out to explore, if not answer, with this book was, can you create a commune that doesn't turn exploitative or doesn't turn into a destructive cult? Do you think it can ultimately? And if so, hypothetically, what would yours look like?
Yeah, you know, like communes are really interesting social experiments. It's a really fascinating way to take a small section of people and like pull them out of our current society and then see what happens. Like, what sort of mess can we make in that community? Do I think it's possible? I guess I want to believe it's possible, that it could be done, because I think there's the potential for something really lovely to happen. Because, you know, our current society isn't doing well, you know?
Right. No, I get it. I mean, my best friend and I joke all the time about our compound that we're going to start soon, and we're going to homeschool our kids. Like, it sounds very culty, but I mean, this is how communes that turn cults start. There's something in the culture that is not working sociopolitically, economically, etc. And you hope for this sort of utopian solution that unfortunately oftentimes finds itself a megalomaniacal leader who screws shit up.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, we're very ill. We're not doing well. So yeah, the idea that we could potentially go create something better is always there. But I just wonder if we're doomed to fail. Is this just human nature? Do we just destroy ourselves regardless of the shape and structure of the government and the society that we put together? This might just be what we do as a human species.
I'm not willing to accept it. And so I repeat my question, what would yours look like?
Oh gosh. I think mine would look very similar to Pastoral in terms of setting.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
but I would want to go, yeah, but I would want to go back in time, you know, back to the 1970s when it was first established. And I think things were a little bit more simpler and honest and good at that point. You know, you had a group of people who had just reached this community and they're planting crops and they're sort of establishing how they're going to govern themselves. So there's a lot of hope and potential at that point. Would I want to go to Pastoral at the time when my book takes place? Probably not. Kind of a dangerous time to exist. So yeah, I think it would look similar to that. But, you know, I don't trust group organization anyway in any form. You know, I didn't like saying the Pledge of Allegiance when I was in school.
That is that, you know, which kids are going to grow up to be dissenters because they're the ones who refuse.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, it just felt wrong and creepy and we were all repeating the same thing. So, you know, yeah, I have a natural aversion to that. However, I'm also a fiction writer. So if given the opportunity to go hang out in a community like this for a short period of time, yes, I mean, that's amazing fodder for a story. So I'll take it. You know, conspiracy theorists, there's some amazing stuff out there. You know, you think the earth is flat? Awesome. Prove it to me. Let's have a discussion about this. Like, let's see if you can make me believe that that is a real thing, because there's a lot to dissect there.
It really is a psychological minefield. They are such characters, the people who zealously sign up for these things. But in terms of participating casually, yeah, I have a friend who's also a writer. She writes some YA books. I wonder if you know her. Sarah Ennie. Do you know her?
Yes.
Do you know about her cult themed Burning Man group?
No,
Before
but
the
we
pandemic,
must
I was gonna
this.
go. Before the pandemic, I was gonna go and perhaps write about it. But yeah, you'd never think she was a burner, but she goes to Burning Man and she hosts are they called troops? I don't know, but she
Sounds
hosts
right.
a cult themed Burning Man troop. And maybe after the pandemic, if it ever ends, I'll go just for the hell of it.
Wow, that's amazing. So
Fun fact.
So then same question back to you. If you were going to create your perfect cult, I mean, you described it a little bit, but like, and you've done so much research on this, right? I mean, if there's anyone who knows all the ins and outs and all of the options. So it's like, you have a buffet of choices here for what you could build your cult around. What would it be?
Well, I have developed a very earnest penchant for tiny houses and the whole like bougie tiny house movement. That's when you know that it's getting culty, is when they start to call themselves a movement. It's like, it's just a tiny house, relax. But I do actually dream of, I dream and I plan to buy land in the mountains outside of LA and build a tiny house and some campgrounds and host writers retreats. And so it sounds pleasant, but if I wanted to exploit it, I have the formula.
Right. So sign me up, because this sounds amazing, but I would first like to see your 5-year business plan so that I can see what in 5 years, how dark and twisted it's going to get. So I know to rip cord at like year 3.5.
That's fair. You know, these groups are all about transparency. If you know what you're signing up for, and if you know how to get out, then, you know, that harbors well.
There'll probably be some paperwork if you want to leave, right? Like fill out this 500-page form and we will gladly let you leave. No problem.
That actually doesn't sound so bad in terms of some of the exit costs I've come across. But I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll turn to some listener questions or tuner inner questions. So if you have some, feel free to pop them down in the Q&A tab down here, because we're going to have lots of time to get to hopefully all of your questions. But before we get to tuner inner questions, I'll ask, you know, obviously people who are interested in reading books about cults or books in this genre, you don't read just one. It's like eating just one chip. You just can't do it. Were there other books in this sort of universe that you were reading as you were writing, or are there other books in this universe that inspired your book that you would recommend? Because I'm sure like after folks binge your book, they're going to want others.
So I didn't read a lot of similar books while I was writing it. And that's a conscious choice to make sure that nothing influences me too much. But you know, a book that I read a few years before I started writing it was California, is what it's called. Who's the author? Anyone know? Oh, Eden Lepucki. Does someone know? Is someone chiming in? I'm trying to read it from across my office, but I think that's the one. And it's just an absolutely beautiful, well done book. It's sort of like one part end of the world, one part cult commune, and just really well written. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that one. But do you have any recommendations? Because you must have read a ton when you were working on your book.
I did. But again, you know, I try not to read things that are way too similar, just for cross-contamination purposes. You know, you want to make sure you're writing something authentic to your voice and your own thoughts. But yeah, there are other cult books that I've read like after my book came out that I would recommend. Well, I mean, cult books come in like so many different genres. Like there are the cult memoirs, and there are the cult books written by psychologists, and there are like cult novels. A cult novel that I think fans of this might also be interested in, not the same genre, but it's called The Atmospherians, written by Alex McElroy. I would recommend that. It's sort of like more contemporary. It's not a thriller, but Yeah. So, okay. So now we're going to turn to listener questions.
Yay.
An anonymous attendee asks, without spoiling things, did you always know what the ending was going to be, or did it change at all while writing or maybe outlining?
Yeah, the ending, I knew I could go two ways with the ending. I could have had how do I say this? How do I tiptoe around this?
So
I could have had somebody not die who dies. I could have had the members of this community leave and not return. But ultimately, I really wanted to see vengeance happen. And it was one of the more satisfying murder scenes I've ever written. Yeah, if I was like cheering myself on as I was writing that, like, yeah, let's just kill this character. So yeah, I needed the vengeance. So I knew I had to kill that character. And it just felt right for like the ultimate ending where the characters end up, just really felt like the best way. And it felt the most like whole, like it brought everything full circle. And I really love like a full circle moment in a story. And so that just felt like the most whole way. But I am curious to see if readers will agree with that ending or not, or if they wish that I'd done it a different way. So it'll be interesting to see.
So interesting. I mean, I hope to write fiction one day, but these are questions that I just like have never had to ask myself yet.
Right.
Emily Harriet asks, when writing the book, did you find yourself more waking up with sparks of inspiration, or did they come late at night?
Ooh, that's a good one. My sparks of inspiration do usually come in the evening. If I'm having a hard time falling asleep, a little trick I have is I will start cycling through story ideas, or if I have like a plot thing, I'll start cycling through those in my mind. And usually the most brilliant ideas come to me and then I fall asleep. So it's like I bore myself by working through my story and my plot, and then I fall asleep. So I'm really good at putting myself to sleep by running through my plot. But yeah, so best story ideas come in the evening. I'm also really superstitious. I have a lot of habits in terms of my writing. So like when I write, I will only face north or east. I know. It's really hard to be me.
No, I'm truly fascinated by this. First of all, I love that your inspiration strikes at night, because I feel like a lot of authors I admire or pay attention to really romanticize the early morning. And I'm not an early riser. So I'm like, oh God, am I deficient as an author because I don't write at like 6 a.m. with my little quill and my tea and whatnot?
You don't write with a quill?
One day when I have my tiny house cult. But I'm fascinated by these rituals because I am like the most non-precious writer. Like I don't have a time, I don't have a thing. Like tell me about these rituals, because I'm truly fascinated.
Well, I have a terrible habit of researching what like famous authors used to do, and then I will adopt them because I think like if it worked for Ernest Hemingway, then probably will work for me. So yeah, I've adopted a lot of really like strange things. But the north and east one, I believe I got that from, I think it's a feng shui thing, that your brain is more creative if you face north or east. So like my desk, the direction I'm facing right now, I know you're trying to calculate where you are. So my desk, I'm facing north right now. And if I, move throughout the house, I make sure I'm always facing north or east. And maybe it's all in my head, but when I've tried to write in other directions, like the creative spark just isn't there. And so I've found it to be true enough that I've maintained it. I've even, okay, I'm really getting deep here, but I've even like when I fly on a plane, because I'm really productive when I fly because there's no distractions.
Yeah.
But if the plane is flying east, so if I'm like flying to New York, I will get so much writing done when I'm flying. But when I'm flying back to the West Coast, I can't get any work done. I'm like, the plane is facing the wrong direction.
Can you just like do a little circle while I work out this plot point real quick?
Yeah. I'm on deadline if the pilot could actually, yeah.
But I actually love it. Like, even if it is all in your head, I think it is, but even if it is, that's still real. Like,
exactly.
It's just your process. whatever
Right.
works, you know.
Even if it's a placebo effect, if it works, it works. So yeah.
I love the placebo effect. The placebo effect is real. Someone in the comments said that sounds a little culty.
Yeah, who wants to join my Northeast writing cult? There'll be a sign up window at the end.
I love the rituals. You know, rituals aren't necessarily bad. You just need to be able to tap in and tap out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. As long as it doesn't hinder your process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then some other people in the comments, they want to try it and they do it too. So you're not totally off center.
Thank you, everyone.
So someone else asks, when writing, was there a character that you felt more drawn to or that you related to most? If so, why? Also, this book is amazing.
Oh, yay. Thank you. The sister B. I just love B so much. I mean, she is the most complex in a lot of ways and maybe misunderstood. And even her chapters are a bit shorter than the other chapters, but I think she is really the crux of the whole story. Like, she is the one who begins the unraveling of sort of like understanding what's really happening. And so I think she's actually a really powerful character in a lot of ways. I probably could have written an entire book just about B, because I think she has a lot of layers to her character. And yeah, I love B. I wish I knew her in real life.
Oh, that's so sweet. I also, come to think of it, I love the names in your books, like your character names. What was the inspiration behind the names of your characters?
I am the most random character namer. So when I'm just like first drafting and I get to a character's like first scene where I have to say their name, I'm just, whatever the first thing that pops into my head is, I put it down. And I'm pretty sure so far in all my books, all those names have stayed what they originally were. So it's just literally it's like the first, I'm just channeling the name, just give it to me now. And usually it's really quick because I'm like in the middle of writing. I just need to put something down. I was like, just name this character really fast, just put something on the page. And so I put it down and it usually ends up being the right one. So far it's working. I don't know why.
That's so interesting. I actually do the same thing. Not that I name characters, but I actually kind of do, because in my books, sometimes I have to like rename people to protect their anonymity or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it's so fun to like come up with a name that like suits them. But I don't know. I don't overthink it either.
Yeah.
Although once I did rename someone and I told them that was their name and they told me they hated it. So I had to come up with something new.
Oh no.
I was like, damn, that's been your character's name in my book for like 6 months. But
right. And then it's hard for you to then process that change because mentally that's who they are with that name.
Yeah. For anyone who's read Cultish, not every name in that book is made up, just some of them. All right. Another question kind of related. What was your process of delving into and fleshing out your characters?
Yeah, you know, I do, because I am such a like avid outliner. I like to have like a really clear understanding of where I'm going before I even draft. So one of the exercises I do is I will create character sheets. And so, you know, I write down first just the basics, right? Like their physical traits, backstory. And then if, you know, as I'm going, as I'm writing, what I usually do is go back and then I expand on that by, sometimes I'll write even like diary entries for them. Like, what are they thinking and feeling in a certain scene? Or if they were going to sit down tonight and like write a diary entry, what would that be? And sometimes that helps uncover some like deeper character traits. Again, for me, characters are hard for me. They're challenging. And so usually they do start to develop and show themselves to me as I'm writing. And oftentimes too, dialogue helps to reveal who a character is. Like as you're in that dialogue scene and you realize, you know, one character gets really emotional or one character gets angry or sad, whatever that emotion that really arises, sometimes it just happens organically when you're writing that dialogue scene. So I find that also helps to really develop who they are. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't love writing dialogue though, now that I'm thinking about it. Like dialogue is hard.
Dialogue is so hard. Another attendee, Katie, asks, how do you come up with such mind-blowing plot twists? Is it always the way you picture the story going, or is it a twist even to you?
Sometimes they are twists to me. I've written a few scenes, especially my first debut book. For those of you who've read The Wicked Deep, in the major reveal scene in that book, there was a dialogue happening between two characters, and I had planned to do the big reveal at the end of the book, but these characters were having this discussion and they just sort of blurted out which sounds weird because I'm typing it, but it really just, sometimes you're typing so fast that these things just start like rising to the surface. And they just sort of like revealed it. And I remember stopping mid-scene and saying to myself, like, wait, is this right? I don't think I should reveal this yet. But I ended up keeping it. And I think because it happened so organically, it's such a great place to like really reveal that twist. But in A History of Wild Places, you know, the twist, yes. I mean, I knew what was coming. You know, I knew the development of that story and where it was going to happen, what the twists were, but it was so complicated in A History of Wild Places that it felt harder to execute, I guess, in that book, because there were so many layers and so many lies upon lies that were happening that was hard for me to keep it straight. So yeah, it's, you know, usually I do know where I'm going with it, but another thing I promised myself when I finished this book was no multiple POVs, and I'm not going to write another book with twists. I thought I'm just going to write a straight, clean book that doesn't have any major like lies or reveals. It's just going to be like a nice, like, you know, suspense mystery. So I sat down to write that book. It didn't work. It was like, I got midway through and went, I need to have a twist. Like I need to throw the whole thing on its head. So I think I'm just cursed to do that.
I was going to say, it sounds very witchy, your process, the way that these stories just like emerge out of you, like shooting out of your fingers unexpectedly.
Yeah. I mean, I do believe that stories like don't necessarily come from our brains. Like they might be, you know, stories might exist somewhere in the ether, and it's just, I'm plucking it down. And what's nice about that thought process is that I don't have to take ownership of it.
You're like, the story's bad, it wasn't mine.
Right. That was the story's fault. You know, I was just writing it, but I had no control over what was happening.
That's amazing. That's amazing. A literary medium.
Yes.
Sort of a craft question from Bethany. How do you power through finishing a novel when dealing with writer's block / running into walls? I feel like I know the answer for you, which is just face north or face east.
Yeah, check your directions. You might be facing the wrong way.
Yeah.
How do I deal with that? You know, I have a couple of tricks. I haven't had, oh my God, knock on wood, I haven't had any major big writer's block moments. God, I'm gonna like knock on a lot of things. I'm so superstitious. Okay. But if I'm ever just feeling, usually what happens is I might get stuck with a plot. Like I realize I've written myself into a hole, and like there's a problem with a character or maybe just a scene element that now doesn't make sense. And so I realize that I have to rework something, and that can be a hard thing to process. So usually my tricks are I go outside, I go for a walk, and I talk through the plot out loud. So preferably you go on this walk where there's not a lot of people, because I'm certain my neighbors see me outside walking down our street talking out loud. And I'm talking about fictional characters and I'm talking things through, but I find that vocalizing it helps me to really like work through a plot and figure out what's not working. I do also just believe that you should really trust your instincts and trust your gut. If you're reading a scene or there's an element that you just kind of keep getting stuck on, doesn't feel right, but you kind of brush past it, those are the things that later a reader is probably going to recognize and say something's not right here. So it really, a lot of writing is just about trusting your instincts. And so when you feel like something's not right, you probably should dig in a little deeper and figure out what that is. I also think as writers, we leave clues for ourselves. Like we leave ways out of problems. Like sometimes you find like the plot's not working. How do I fix this? And you go, oh yeah, there's the pocket watch that so-and-so has. I haven't even utilized that. I can weave that in and it solves the problem. So I find that we leave things for ourselves. So yeah, I mean, I think there's just little clues like that. I do handstands sometimes because I think it, you know, the blood rushes to your head. It just kind of turns the world upside down. And that really sort of just like helps to kind of move your body. I think really it's just like getting the blood flowing. Do you have anything like, is there something that you found works for you?
Literally same, like change of scenery. It's amazing. Yeah. I'll be so stuck. I mean, My problem, well, actually, my problem when I'm writing nonfiction is kind of similar. I'm not trying to like tie a plot together, but I am trying to connect logic. And sometimes that's hard, especially when your undertakings are as ridiculous as mine. Like everything is a cult. How am I going to make that make sense?
Right.
But genuinely, I will be sitting on my couch, probably facing fucking west and not knowing what to do.
Like
and
a fool,
like
like the fool that you are.
and then I'll just straight up like stand up to go to get a glass of water or like stand up to walk to the mailbox. And all of a sudden, by the time I sit down, I know what I need that line to be. Or sometimes I'll really go crazy and go to the local coffee shop and then start writing there. And and I too, I mean, you and I also are writing toward deadlines that are set by someone else other than us. And there's a whole lot that a deadline will do.
Yeah, you don't get the luxury of sitting around and like wallowing in the writer's block. You gotta
like we
sometimes you have to blunt force trauma, push your way through it.
Totally. So many great questions. I'm glad we started asking them early. If this book were to be adapted into a film or TV series, what would be your dream cast?
Oh my gosh, I'm the worst at dream casting. I get this question a lot with my other books, and I just never have any idea. Usually readers have a much better idea of like who should play the characters, but I will say that for this book to be adapted would be very challenging, because there are things that I was able to get away with in book form that you can't get away with in a film adaptation. So it's possible, it could be done, but it would be very, very tricky. And I won't say anything else without giving anything away.
Nice. Let's see. Oh, someone asks, B was my favorite character. How like you is she?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Is B like me? I don't know. It's so hard to be, introspective with yourself on something like that. I do get that question a lot, like which of your characters is most like you? I've always thought with my last book, Winterwood, that what's her name? Nora, I think you guys, was that her name? I'm pretty sure her name was Nora Walker. And I think because she lived beside a lake by the forest, and she would go out every full moon and gather lost items. I mean, she just like her soul and spirit most resonated with me. So she would probably be the closest, but I'm sure there are ways that B is similar to me, but I just haven't figured out what they are, other than she's really great.
I know, it's so hard to see. It's like a piece of me is in every single character, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But another attendee, Jamie, asks, how did you decide on the title of the book? Was it a whole process or did it just come to you?
Yeah, that one just came to me. That was really early on too, that when I first sat down to draft it and you have to title your Word doc something, it just sort of came to me. I was really thankful that my editor and my publisher wanted to keep that title, because I really loved it from the beginning and just felt like it really summed up the story and just was a really beautiful title. I love titling stuff. So I have a separate Word doc with just titles. And I think I probably have like 150 titles in there that I hope to be able to use someday.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, I love a good title because it can just really grab your attention. And so if I see a word I really like, there's some words that are really captivating. So I like throw that in that Word doc, like, ooh, a title of that word would be great.
Oh, do you I mean, people ask me this question all the time and it's hard, but I have had to come up with an answer.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite English word?
Oh my gosh, I've never been asked that before. I don't know. What is yours? A favorite?
I mean, literally in my author bio on my first book, Wordslut's like jacket, I didn't have any like accolades at that point. So I was like, what am I going to put in my author bio? And I just put, Amanda Montell is from Baltimore and these are her favorite words. I said that my favorite English word was nook. I love the word nook.
Yeah.
It's cozy, but it's plosive. It just feels good. That's one of many words that I love, but I also have favorite foreign words. And my favorite foreign word, at least in my author bio, is this very, very, very Scottish word. The word is tattertal, and it means the moment when you go to introduce someone and realize you've forgotten their name.
Oh, that's so brilliant. That's a good one. Yeah.
But I should enlist you to help me because I'm in the process of titling my third book.
Ooh.
It is proving very difficult. I literally had like a title brainstorm call with my publisher today.
Oh,
I should run some titles by you and see if you can help me.
yeah. I'll send you my Word doc. You can just pick and choose.
Oh my God. No, I can't possibly. I could never. Let's see. Another attendee asks, would love to hear about the book to audiobook experience. What was it like to hear your book? So many narrators.
Yeah. Well, so I just heard it, as I think many of you have, because I just shared it online just yesterday. And I haven't listened to the whole audiobook yet, haven't had time, but just the opening narrator's voice it's like Sam Elliott combined with, I mean, it just is the most rich, in-depth voice I've ever heard. It's so lovely. And yeah, they did 5 narrators for the book, which is a lot. So I can't wait to hear it. And I normally don't listen to my audiobooks of my books because I don't need to relive my story.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's cringy. It's like, oh, you're going to like come across some sentence where you're like, God damn it. Why did I repeat the word sweet 16 times in one paragraph? You know,
and it's too late and there's nothing you can do about it. So there's no point like rehashing it. No. But after hearing this sort of like short clip of the audiobook, I'm like, yep, I'm definitely going to be listening to this one. And I did start it today, but I'm only a few minutes in. But it was interesting to hear like it frames the story in a different way, as most audiobooks do. Like hearing somebody narrate it just changes the whole dynamic of the story. It's such a fun way to absorb books. I love audiobooks. I don't know if you do, but I'm a big fan.
I don't listen to audiobooks really for some reason. I just like never got into the habit, but I like respect and know that they're beloved. And I think my books are like meant to be listened to.
Yeah.
Let's see here. People are really interested in your craft process. Someone asks, can you talk about your outline process?
Ooh, yeah. I should someday do like an Instagram series, I think, about my outlining process, because I get a lot of questions about it. And I've developed it over the years. And, you know, as I was saying before, like I research a lot of things, so I add on and it gets more bonkers as time goes on. But typically how I start is once I have sort of a general idea, I will write out like an outline, a chapter by chapter outline. So in a Word doc, it's like chapter 1, and it might just be a couple paragraphs of like, here's what the opening scene looks like. And I go through each chapter that way. And sometimes it might be, I have a snippet of a dialogue, or I imagine a character like in a certain setting. So I just kind of throw in some really general notes at that point. Then I go to my whiteboard. And on the whiteboard, I do like a 3-act structure. And so I make sure that my major plot point beats are like hitting where they should on a 3-act structure. And I do it on the whiteboard so that I can adjust, move things around if I need to. And then once I have that, then I go to the Excel spreadsheet. It's hard to be me, you guys. So then I go in there and I create what's called a book map, and that's like a scene by scene. So I break it down even more in depth than the chapter by chapter. So it's a scene by scene. I put in there, like, where does the scene take place? What's the overriding emotion of this scene? What's the major action of the scene? So then once I have that spreadsheet filled out, it's really helpful because I can go back and say like, well, too many of my scenes are taking place like at the diner down the street, which will never happen because I'll never have a diner in any of my books. But you know, you can sort of recognize and see like the 3,000-foot view of your story. And then I use the book map for revisions too. So if I realize later on in my book that like, oh, this truck used to be blue, but then I started calling it a red truck by chapter 26. So I go back into my plot map and I make notes in there. Like, okay, I mentioned the truck in these 3 scenes. I make a note in there to go back and change that. So my book map becomes like my major reference point while I'm writing and drafting and revising, and everything is in there. So it makes the revising process a lot faster and easier. I can take my editor's notes then when she's making notes about things, and I just plug those into my book map, and then I can just go in, see my scene, and make changes. So it helps me in the long run. It's a lot of front-loaded work because I have to do all of that. But I find when I sit down to draft, I have a much clearer picture about where I'm going. I'm less likely to run into plot holes. I'm less likely to have writer's block as well, because I do have an idea of like where the next scene is. And, you know, I know tomorrow when I wake up, I'm going to jump back into scene 8 and I'm excited about whatever's going to happen there. So it allows me to be a little bit more fluid, I think, in my writing in that way. But sometimes I also just envy people who just write off the cuff and have no outlines. Like that just sounds so lovely.
Yeah, but I think your way is so much more sustainable because, you know, we tend to romanticize like the writer who, you know, like, and the muse and whatever, but it's like, no, it's, I think of this as way more of a craft than anything else. And I'm like, it's not glamorous day to day. It's boring. You have to just like sit down. It's like, you know, whittling a cabinet, or I don't know. Do you even whittle a cabinet? Whatever. It's like,
oh, classic cabinet whittling. I know.
But it's like, you know, it can be tedious, but you just do it every day. And then 2 years later, you have a book, or 6 months later, in your case, or 4 months, or I don't know. She's fast, y'all.
But I think too, it is, sorry, quickly, it is important for people to establish their own routine. I think it's easy to look at authors and go, well, that's how they're doing it, I better do it that way. But like, I'm doing a process that is not relative to anybody else I know. And so it's really about trying different things and figuring out what is that routine that works for you. And once you find it and you can like settle into that group, it does help you when you get to the place where you need to be cranking out books faster. So it's about figuring out what is that process that works best for you and not trying to mimic somebody else. Cause what do I know, you guys, like truly, I'm stumbling over here.
Like there's no right or wrong way. There's just what works for you.
Yeah.
Let's do
one facing west if you want. Go crazy.
Exactly. We'll do one last question, and then we're done, I guess. What does your writing day look like?
Oh, okay. Well, we're going to get back into just some quick little superstitions here. So my old acupuncturist told me this because I asked him, like, help me out here. Like, what do I need to know? What's the best way to be creative? And he said that our brains are most creative in the morning, not necessarily like early, Amanda. So you're okay. But our brains are more creative when we're still in that dreaming state. So the place where your brain activates dreams is also where your creativity lives. So the sooner you can sit down to write as soon as you wake up, whatever time that might be, the better off you're going to be in terms of like just being creative and getting words on the page. So I usually wake up and start writing first thing, often before I even make my cup of tea, before I do anything else. I want to like get into that first. And I try to avoid emails or doing anything else that's going to sap that creative energy. So I sit down, I start writing. And what my acupuncturist told me, which this sounds like a cult now, is that really right around noon is when your creative energy sort of drops off. So at noon, you should stop, take a break for a few hours. And then around 5 p.m., the creative energy starts spiking up again. It really starts to peak around 7 p.m. and then goes until I think it's around 10. And then if you try to work after 10, you will get your second wind at that point. Like there's an energy that happens and you get your second wind after 10. So if you want to keep pushing it, you can do that. But if you want to try to get some sleep, it's better to stop before 10 o'clock. So all of that is really great when you're not on deadline. When you're on deadline, what your day looks like is you wake up, you write all day. You try to squeeze in a breakfast around 1 p.m. and then a lunch around 7 p.m. And then you write until about 2 a.m. So for the last 6 months, my day has looked more like that. Not ideal, not how I want to be working. But yeah, you just make it work. But typically then, I make some tea around like 10. And then I sit back down and work and, I just grind it out.
This is tough stuff, writing books, people. And that's why you're going to need to go and buy A History of Wild Places. Not only because it's the product of so much labor, but because it really is a beautiful, beautiful book. If you haven't picked it up already, now's the time.
Yay.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, both of you for that great conversation and all that, and all those interesting tips about all that stuff. And that's fascinating. I love it. So it's also thanks everyone out there for joining us, and thanks for being so interactive. It was wonderful to see everybody so interested in this great chat over here too. So, so please go and pick up a copy of History of Wild Places right here. You can also check out Amanda's book as well. So both of these. And while you're there on pals.com, check out our upcoming events. We've got a whole lineup of great events up ahead of us. And we look forward to seeing you at another one very soon. All right. Thank you so much, both of you. And thanks everyone out there. Have a great evening.
Thank you guys. Thanks, Amanda.
Bye.